Morning. I'm just sitting around talking to myself. It's quite interesting. I can see two reflections of myself in my glasses lens. And if you pay attention, you might too. So there's all three of us here talking to ourselves with you, in front of you, with us. Um, I had some things to say, obviously. and they're they're art related. Um, it's to do with the cut of my thrust, as it were, which I believe is a swashbuckling term to do with swords and whatnot. Which, goes to combat, doesn't it? Or at least sporting, sparring. And the Bhagavad Gita reckons that, we're all born into this battle, this spiritual battle, and we don't really get a choice. We have to take a side, as it were. And, I'm in a fairly redundant field. Although, historically it's obviously a pretty enticing and important field, the humanities, art. But, I've made some wee art statements recently, and I just want to reiterate the sort of, terms, what I think I'm doing in my large complex system, old brain danglies. And why it's relevant on a well on a cultural and intellectual and artistic level, beyond sort of having the correct gender or credentials or family, or being in the right country or being the right race or anything like that, being a 50-year-old whitish male. I've got reasonably olive complexion skin, I think, and I think that's the Irish background. I was listening to an Irish intellectual the other day, fascinating chap, likes long words and concept pieces. He talks about the novelty and concretion of the way that the universe loves. It's a complexity making machine. Nature, extrapolates complex systems, and that's essentially what it does, including our nervous systems, our brains, our neocortexes and whatnot. Very complex things, apparently. And so, I'm not, there is a simple fundamentalist side of my visual au revoir, but really the tangle of play, of bits, of putting bits together feels to me like a sort of, an internal repair, DNA, cellular sort of biome. And, it is painstaking, and it is like making kind of crappy toys as well, which I did a lot of as a alienated boy. But it's that notion of the humanities being important, in a sort of post-human, post-structural, post-industrial, post-colonial, corporate, communist, technocratic war about disestablishing Western values of peasant utopias, which New Zealand was quite a nice peasant utopia, apparently. Apparently, I'm not too sure about that myself, but me and a friend, I inherited the the gusto, the spunk from, you know, 70s, 70s and 80s radical New Zealand arts makers. You know, like a proletariat who was empowered with its own sense of social change and moral importance from, you know, a country sort of ditching its church roots in terms of monocultural, you know, internal moral compasses. And we were sort of politicizing that, and we were also experimenting with various sort of indigenous takes on knowledge systems and you know, human rights and female rights and one of the things that always struck me was, and when I realised I was going to be an artist, like I remember being a child, sort of thinking, well, what about children's rights? And you know, they don't have any under a solo parent in poverty working 3 jobs and getting a political science degree. You don't have rights as a kid in that instance. You overeat, you fight with your brother, and you get yelled at, and you watch horror movies. And you certainly don't get touched. But we're not digressing into that world. You know, for all lack, there is also opportunity, and I suppose I learnt a lot from my communist zealot mother with a chip on her shoulder. So I inherited a pretty juicy New Zealand arts culture from a pretty rich, spoilt, privileged country. And those baby boomers are still around now. They still think the world is the same as, you know, what they grew up in. And it's not, guys, it's not, you know. You don't see a lot of my generation opening galleries or having families in 2 houses, do you? Yeah. I mean, we got brought up with a sort of user pays prison system as a culture. And you know that. And you're still operating from a lifestyle privilege. So many of my generation has wheedled its way into the bowels of institutional racketeering bureaucracy, where you can pay lip service to novel ideas of the humanities and just write some thesis about it. Whereas actual practitioners are looked at as scummy street people with mental problems. But, you know, mental problems is all about what lens you're using, really, and who's in and out. Because arguably, you know, the dead world has, well, it is entirely a mental problem, whereas the spiritual world is the only real world going on, because we are a continuum of essence through time and space. So this gets me back to what, you know, motivates some of my serious work, which is the sense of threat, because I don't feel like there's a future, and that's, I mean sort of a cultural future. I mean outside of a sort of Gattaca-based, you know, extreme hierarchy of elite privilege. I don't see a world that wouldn't look a lot like a self-administered prison very soon now. And so, you know, I might be in a little micro bubble of some kind of freedom, where I still get to make my arguably institutional works of display. around complex internal and external systems, because like I keep saying, the individual is part of the organism. I would love to just bang on about Zen beauty with the cosmos and nature. I would love to just focus on the ineffable mind of God, and that be enough. Unfortunately, I can't seem to deprogram myself from being a New Zealand citizen, or by extension, part of the civilization. And I have some kind of encoding around making a difference, or not some having a say, certainly, or else I wouldn't be blathering on YouTube, but more exploring the existential terrain. And I'm going to leave the conclusions of that exploring open. Although I sound like I have an agenda in what I'm saying, I'm actually describing the topography, of the now and the near future. And I think peasant intellectuals, genius generally, should be regarded seriously as our primary asset. If we were a country wanting to value itself. But, I'm cynical enough to know that there not only is top-down pressure to suppress that, it cherry picks from, the correct propaganda in trained elites that toe the party line of the cult. So, I'm pretty sure New Zealand's been hothoused through mind control programs, social engineering programs that, other than the general globalist one, for a hell of a long time. And those social movements of the 70s and 80s have pretty much been co-opted. And just like my late mother's career, she basically got brought out by her own needs of wanting to have job security, and she ended up working as a part-time fascist for the state herself, and inevitably it killed her. Well, anyway, that's a personal travesty, but it's the way that left-wing people have basically become screws in the jail themselves. The system that they, grew up fighting, they became part of and administering later on. That's what I'm trying to say. So, I'm not actually trying to fight a system. Of course not. That would be pointless and suicidal. But what I am trying to do is discuss the existentials around technology, around human genetics, around information, and perhaps waft a little bit of pheromones of the mystic into the highly computerized, externalized forms of what we call, media information. I think artists are a natural repository in the jungle, in the ecosystem of inner yearnings, inner knowings, and I point to ancient systems of internal knowing, the Vedic and yogic, and obviously the Qigong, which I invested a lot in too, and these internal sciences of noetics, consciousness studies. So, I mean, art is this confluence between the internal and the external, between the spirit and the ego, and the known and the unknown. And, it's a rhythm of densities that overlap and oscillate. And that's what's still intriguing me about my large-scale danglies, standing waves, and fields of information. and although analog in this case, I still think kind of hark to the cave mind and transportive technologies of perception, basically. I mean, art's not just a conceptual cookie cutter ideologue from art school. It's lived experience, and unless you're willing to go into your own broken heart, your own family background and trauma, I mean, it's basically ancestral travel, isn't it? But this is what I mean about the future. It's like ancestry to me, isn't just a continuum of literal family trees of faces and names. It's more like a plant. It's more like a confluence of men and women through time. And where does this plant? Where does our human communities, our human organism grow to if we keep getting put in the magic bullet blender, and forgotten who we are, and what our purpose is? Um, yeah, and basically a sort of, um, a professional victim sickness farm culture. Um, Light and free. Yeah, I think consciousness, spirit has these unforeseen things from dark and light. Certainly, security and identities will be threatened and will be thrown into crisis some more. Uh, and I meant culturally. I mean that's the general path for artists. Identities break down seasonally, as it were, and dissolution of self is inevitable every new series or process of work. It's a rhythmic collapse when you're an artist, but which is pretty much why I've got quite solid foundations, because you get to fall apart when you're safe. When you're not safe, it's harder to fall apart. But even that, I mean, when I was travelling through India and that, I was a basket case then, and I seem to still manage the basics of keeping it together. Not so much mentally though. I didn't. I was pretty distraught and stuff. But yeah, yeah. So it's just that thing of sort of making arguably and institutional public art and not really having a seat at the table, as it were, even though I'm well qualified. And all of that stuff's more or less personality politics, funding, and schoolyard popularity. Are you liked? It's rather odd, because I had to proffer my CV to an agency the other day, and yeah, it certainly looks like I'm an artist. Jesus, the stuff I've done. Yeah. Anyway, it's a bit indulgent of me, thank you. But I think the story. We live in epic, Kafka-esque Philip K. Dick. We live in interesting times, and I don't think that's just my imagination. Um, and yeah, the stories actually do need to be told, and we are the only ones to tell them, and that's also a core reality. There is like we are responsible for how we frame our narrative, and um, I've got to suspend the fact that I don't quite know what reality is. Um, we're told a lot of things, aren't we? And I think one of the stated objectives of the CIA, and I think they said this way back in the 60s, was that, we will have achieved our mission when the public is told 100% lies, and they don't know any different. Sounds like the education system to me. Not disputing the wonders of scientism or anything, it's great tools, isn't it? It's just, agendas of using tools and who funds them and who designs the tools. 20 minutes of ranting. Aren't you lucky? Bye.